Welcome to the Lifetime at Work podcast, episode number 7. The podcast about our lives and our careers and the businesses we work in. We spend so much of our lives at work. How do we make the time count? If you're curious about other jobs, maybe considering a life or career change, or maybe you have a dream of working for yourself and owning your own business one day, this is the podcast for you. My name is Greg Martin, and I'm a former investment banker turned entrepreneur, and I'm the CEO and co-founder of a food business called Farmer. Every week, I talk to guests from the business world about the happiness and meaning they get from their jobs. The goal is to help you build more meaning, more purpose, and more fulfillment into your work. And this episode is all about the world of accounting. And whether you're in the industry or not, accounting touches us all. And what we talk about will apply no matter what industry you're in. So here, let's cue the intro music and I'll explain everything. If you're a fan of the podcast, go to lifetimeatwork.com, and there you can subscribe to the email list, and you can also just really follow all the things that I'm doing with this podcast now and in the future. You can also subscribe to the podcast on whatever platform you listen to podcasts on. I'm on YouTube now. You can check out YouTube. There's a link on that Lifetime at Work website that you can check out all of the different platforms, but you can also find me on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, all those great ones. This podcast episode is sponsored by Farmer Prepared Meals. It's the prepared meals company that I own, and there are a lot of really interesting things going on that we're doing right now with it. We've just opened a retail shop. We're open at least 3 days a week, maybe 4 by the time you're listening to this, and you can come and get meals, prepared meals. They'll either be frozen or fresh. We've got a lot of fresh stuff too that you can take home, heat up for the family or whomever you live with. We are also very close, probably by the time you're listening to this as well, we'll have launched our own delivery service. So you can order our meals online and get them delivered pretty much anywhere in the GTA. And there's a lot more selection and a lot of new things that we're working on. So check out the website, farmr.ca, farmer.ca, and learn all about it. And you can follow us and all that great stuff. Thanks in advance. This week's episode, I told you, it's about accounting, and I wanted to start this episode really by talking about me because I thought I wanted to be an accountant. I tried actually too. When I graduated from high school, I thought I was going to university to become an accountant. I knew that accounting involved numbers, but numbers that weren't too hard, which is sort of my expertise. And so I thought I was going to be an accountant, and I didn't get in. I didn't get a job. I couldn't break into the industry at all. And I found finance and ended up doing that instead. And I think it was better for me ultimately, but I sort of hold accounting near and dear to my heart. I think why this episode is really interesting is because I'm talking with someone I went to high school with. Her name's Shalini, and she became an accountant. And though she went through this path of working at some larger firms, doing audit, doing a few audit related kind of feeling sort of things, she didn't love it. And so she ended up taking a risk and starting her own accounting practice and trying to build her own book of business. She's online, she's on social media a lot, but what she'll tell you is that she really enjoys a lot of the other things, the non-accounting related things, the helping small businesses and entrepreneurs and individuals understand accounting and tax and all those things that we sort of find boring, but she's using her skills to actually help these people, and it makes that job for her really meaningful and really interesting, and kind of that's where she drives a lot of her happiness and her enjoyment for the job is through that. So it's a great example of how no matter what skills you have and whatever job you're in, you do have skills and you can apply them to lots of different things, and it's always important, I think, to focus on that and think about that as you think about the next career you may want to do. You can try to take an angle at it like this and go at it from the perspective of just trying to use the skills and use the technical skills that you might have to help whomever you think is interesting. And maybe that could be, being an accountant for a sports team, or being, getting involved in nonprofits, or whatever it might be. I mean, there's a million things that you can kind of do, and it really depends on your interest. But I think this is just a good example of that. So you will learn in this episode a little bit about accounting if you don't know it. If you're thinking about it as a career and you're a young person, I think this episode will be really helpful for you. But if you're in the biz and you love accounting like I do, you're going to like this episode a lot too. So Shalini, welcome to the Lifetime at Work podcast. Thanks for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
Awesome. Right. Well, you're an accountant, and I wanted to talk about all the world of accounting. I thought I was going to be an accountant. Actually, that's what when I started university, I totally had that in the realm of what I was going to do, and I took a different path. But you're in it, and I thought it would be a great person to talk about the industry and talk about the career really, and all the things that it can do and is. But so maybe the best place to start is just giving an overview of sort of what you do today and your business. You sort of run your own business, and curious to hear about what that is now, and we'll sort of later get into sort of how you got here and a bunch of other stuff too. But why don't you start with that?
Sure. So right now, as an accountant, I have my own firm and I help other entrepreneurs. I have decided a lot of my niche is on the either brand new or a few years in entrepreneur. And so why I chose that is because a lot of accountants won't even touch people under a certain revenue threshold. And there's an entire industry out there of entrepreneurs that are just not getting the support. So I really love working with other entrepreneurs in the startup phases or the first few years of their business. That's not to say that I don't have businesses that have been around for a while, but when I'm helping entrepreneurs, for me, it's more than just here's your taxes, sign here, see you next year. It's a lot of learning. So let's face it, when you become an entrepreneur, nobody teaches you what you're supposed to know. Right. About accounting and taxes. You know you have to comply with CRA. You don't want CRA knocking on your door, but nobody really tells you what that looks like. So a lot of what I do now is education based, of educating entrepreneurs of what they can and can't do, what CRA expects of them. And so I'm applying a lot of those principles that I learned in university, but sharing that with my clients so that they know what they're supposed to do and save money while doing it.
Gotcha. Yeah, I know. I'm an entrepreneur, and honestly, and I've been in finance, business, et cetera, and in past, and I've done a lot of accounting related stuff, but it was more corporate, and the minutia, it's not, you kind of think you know it in many ways, or sort of you get it because you learn a little bit of it in school, but then I also feel like in the long run you don't, and we'll talk about sort of your social media as well, but there's little things that you just sort of pick up all the time about accounting and about taxes and all these sorts of things. And they're kind of boring topics, right? They're not things that you normally just come up in conversation when you're talking about, but they're actually super valuable. And there's a monetary like value to all these things, which is cool. And it sounds like sort of what you're sort of targeting. How do you where do your clients come from? How do you get new clients and sort of, who forms the base of the people you work with?
Networking is a big way that I've built my client list. So in my world, or in the world of accounting, most accountants will buy a book of business. They'll find somebody
Right.
who's retiring, buy their book of business. So they're not really looking for clients. They have an existing book that they've purchased, or they buy a partnership into an existing firm that already has brand recognition or street credibility. So clients are already kind of knocking on their door, not looking for a particular partner, but just knowing that they want to go to, the KPMGs or the EYs of the world. They don't care who, they just want the name. Because I decided I didn't buy a book of business, I have been building my client list organically. Networking and word of mouth is where I've gotten all of my clients from. Very little advertising efforts have worked, just because when you're dealing with a size of practice my size, people want to know that you have a reputation. So they'll look to still, ask in the networking groups, I'm looking for an accountant. And then I would reach out, they'd make a call. And now other people refer me in those networking groups. And so that also then builds upon that credibility factor. But it's all been word of mouth, all of it.
Right. And your sort of niche, I guess you sort of saw this opportunity in entrepreneurs, in smaller businesses that people were less wanting, or other accountants were less inclined to be interested in covering, which I think is, again, smart, but also kind of cool. I mean, I imagine part of it too is that, it's probably a bit more interesting too. Is it dealing with companies and seeing them grow? Like you actually get a little bit more into them probably, and into the companies and inner workings than you probably typically would if you were just dealing with, these large established companies. Is that, you think that's true? And does that appeal to you?
I definitely have a more personal relationship with my clients
Yeah.
just because they are all, for the most part, one person operations. They might have staff supporting them, but they are still very much in the weeds themselves. And so they need the guidance, they need the advice, they need to know that they're not paying more in taxes than what they need to do. My firm also does financial planning, so they also want to understand, how do I balance my personal needs with my business needs? Because for them, they are equal. Whereas when you get to some of the mid-sized companies out there that have like hundreds of staff and employees and multiple partners, multiple people, the business is very much a standalone operation at that point, and all they need is to make sure they're on CRA's nice list. They don't need the help of
Yeah.
how to actually run their business and how to manage their finances. So I work predominantly with like maybe one or two shareholders, if even. Most of them are usually single shareholders or like a husband-wife duo, and they really want to make sure like this is their livelihood.
Yeah, it's that much more important, I think, yeah, than the relationship of, say, a typical account. Because a lot of times, I think in the corporate world, and you did obviously had to get your hours, and were working in a firm earlier, and I imagine that is just a lot more structured, and yeah, you don't have the stakes, I think, that you probably do with a small business as well, which I imagine is interesting. I go back to this thing that a lot of people think, and it was a bit of my worry in even having this as a podcast topic and how to make it interesting, because there's an element of accounting that is just boring, right? That is just right. Do you find that, like, there is an element? I like it. Like, I've always really enjoyed accounting and how they've taken these things and make it interesting. Not interesting, but how you need it, right? Like, it's important. But there's a sense of, hey, I'm going to put it off, or I'm not going to do it, or that this isn't the exciting thing. Do you encounter that, or are you just totally into it all the time that you don't think
No,
that?
well, okay, so I always say accounting and bookkeeping is kind of like working out. Nobody really goes to the gym because they really love lifting weights. They like to see the results that comes from lifting the weights or
Right.
running on a treadmill for half an hour. And that's the same when it comes to bookkeeping and tax planning. It's not that, I mean, yes, there's some pretty cool strategies and we can have some fun with it. Bookkeeping is boring,
Yeah.
right? But when you see your numbers and you see them improving or you learn something about it, it's the results that you're going after. So it's that administrative task to get you the results. Just like you go to the gym because you want that body, you want that lifestyle, you want, that end result.
Yeah.
So yeah, accounting and tax isn't the sexiest of topics, but it's your entire foundation. So you need to learn to love your numbers, because that is literally the foundation, not just of your business, but of our entire way of living in the world.
Right. Yeah. No, I because you can't. It's sort of like, once it's all said and done at the end, you can't then say, okay, I'll do the accounting now. Like, you can't, or just your financials generally, you sort of have to plan that from, I think, the outset, to make sure that everything works. And it's one of those things, though, that if you're not into it, you may just hire someone to do it for you, and just tell you when there's something wrong. But in and of itself, you do also have to sort of stand out. And that, I was curious, sort of, when you said, hey, I need to go out and network with people and grow, because you also, for instance, are on sort of LinkedIn and Instagram. And I remember, I mean, we've known each other a long time, and so I've sort of followed your Instagram. And I remember when you first started it, and we're posting a lot of things about, like, how are you? I was curious as how you were going to come up with enough content to post regularly, and to have things go, because I struggled. I was in the food business, and we struggle with sort of what to post all the time and try to keep it interesting. But you've done actually a really great job, and it seems, every time I look, I'm like, oh man, you have more and more followers. How do you sort of make it interesting on social media and to the world, to kind of, I think, show your brand and personality and all that? Is it hard?
It in the beginning, yes, it was very challenging for me, because I had this idea of what an accountant is supposed to look like and talk like and act like, just because coming from a corporate world, you kind of have this vision of a stuffy old man with a briefcase and like a pocket protector or something, right?
Yeah.
but then somebody told me my personality is not like that. And in another world, I don't know if I would have even gone into accounting. I might have done something else. But the best compliment somebody ever gave me is, you speak English. And so I realized that I have this ability to explain something in layman's terms that the other person actually is understanding. Right. And so that is the approach I've taken to my social media. There's no shortage of entrepreneurs out there, whether it's your side hustle or your main bread and butter business. There's no shortage of entrepreneurs, but there is a shortage of people who are willing to take the time to explain to them what they should or should not be doing. The amount of people that have come to me and said, my accountant never told me that, or until you just said it, I never understood it.
Right.
And that's what I've taken to my social media. I don't get a lot of engagement. Not a lot of people are asking me comments or anything like that, but people come to me afterwards and like, I've actually implemented what you said, or I went to my accountants and asked them, can I claim this? And we realized we haven't been, or whatever. It's an educational element that's on my social media.
Yeah. And I think too, like I've been spending a lot of time trying to learn about social media and that sort of stuff. And I go in and out of being excited to be on it and posting and not. But I think, it's up to you. You can obviously post as much as you want, but it's trying to show people your personality and also making them aware, hey, you're there, because we're all busy and we're all doing things and we don't necessarily have time to call everyone up and catch up with them. But to remember, I mean, and like, you and I are a perfect example. I think I wouldn't have known that you were doing accounting unless you had a social media presence. Like we're not good enough friends that I would have said, oh yeah, she's the one. Like I know lots of accountants and whatever, but to sort of be about that and to post about that and also sort of weave in stuff. You can weave in stuff about your family and your life and all that. You can really, I think, broaden the number of people that you can touch every week or every month or however often you're posting and checking those things. So it's a good way, right?
Because when I'm working with other entrepreneurs, like I said, for them, their business is their bread and butter. We develop that personal relationship. I know about their kids, they know about my kids. It's not just a transaction.
Yeah.
I've become friends with some of my clients because we realize our kids are the same age and we can do play dates. So that's the messaging that I also put into my social media, is that I'm a person too. As much as I have a brand and Dharna CPA is a brand, it's all about me. Like I work with my dad, but he's not present on social media. Nobody knows anything about him. So it's portraying who I am so that the person on the other end also knows what to expect when they reach out to me, because they want to become a client or because they want to do a consult or whatever that engagement ends up looking like.
Right. Why? So taking, you mentioned earlier about getting into accounting and the different life thing. Why did you choose to get into accounting in the first place and take that in university?
It was a process of elimination. I'm not going to lie. Throughout most of high school, I actually had medicine on my brain. I thought I was going to be a doctor. I'm Indian background. So, right. My parents gave me my standard. You can be an engineer, you can be an accountant, you can be a doctor, you can be a lawyer. Those were my four options.
Typical list, yeah.
And my dad actually is an engineer from undergrad and then went into accounting. So what I wanted to be a pediatrician for the longest time. But then I realized after researching it a little bit more that I'd be in school till I was like in my 30s. And I didn't know that I loved it enough to give it that kind of a dedication.
Right.
And then as you recall, we were also the first year that didn't have grade 13 or OAC. So we were the double cohort. So there was a lot of pressure about, are we going to get into the university spot? So I literally changed from science to business as I was applying to university. Some personal things happened in my family life that just made me want to be a bit closer. So literally, I chose to go the business route as I'm filling out my university applications. And then accounting was the designation that went with business, right? I could have gone the lawyer route or the accountant route. And so my dad being an accountant, I was like, well, maybe you can help me if I get stuck with the question.
Yeah.
And the rest, as I also kind of played it safe. I knew exactly how to become an accountant. I knew what path I needed to take.
Yeah.
But then when I became an accountant and I got my designation, I was like, well, now what? And
Right.
I hated it when I was in the corporate world. I hated being an accountant when I was doing audit.
That's what everyone says. What is so bad about audit? I know enough people that are in accounting, and you know what usually happens? I end up having this conversation, and they say they hate audit, and I feel like almost that because they're talking about it, I feel bad asking them more questions about it, because I feel like it's just such a bad thing for them to even talk about, like such a negative thing that I almost feel bad asking them, because I don't want to bring up the memories, but I'm going to do it here. What's so bad?
So there's a few different elements for me that I hated. One, because you are basically walking into another person's place of business and questioning whether they've done their work properly.
Right.
So you get a lot of resistance from the client side sometimes, because I've had people where I picked like my sample size and they're like, "Ugh, I knew you were going to pick that one." And I'm like, I didn't know I was going to pick that one. So you kind of go into this hostile environment to begin with, because you are legitimately questioning whether or not they did everything they were supposed to be doing.
Right.
So even from an interaction perspective with the client, some of them are fearing for their job, that I'm going to find some sort of mistake and get them fired. The hours are very long, just because the deadlines are very tight. We have to, do all of this audit work within unrealistic time frames. So oftentimes I was out of the house before the sun was up, or before anybody in my family was even awake. And I'd come home and they were already asleep. So you end up giving a lot of your life because you're working like 70, 80 hours a week. And then even from the firm side, there's some very unrealistic expectations. They give you a time frame of, okay, well, this section that you're working on, it's only budgeted for 4 hours. So if I took 4.5 or 5 hours, they would then question, well, why did it take you so long? And so there's already this element of, I need to get my work done within this 4 hours, or I'm going to have to justify. And sometimes it just took you longer. So people work at different paces.
Yeah.
So the corporate culture was very stressful. The corporate mentality, nobody ever said thank you for doing a good job. It was just expected of you that you were going to put in the hours and you weren't going to complain. And oh, you have a life outside of work? Well, good for you, but we've got to be here till midnight or till 2 o'clock in the morning. I had one friend who actually slept at the office at the client site and then woke up the next day. Like, he didn't even bother going home. He was too tired that he just slept there. So it's the hours, it's the lifestyle, it's what you're doing. It's interesting to understand a lot of different businesses and how they operate.
Right.
But it's just the overall atmosphere around it is just not very welcoming.
Right. And it's not even like, I guess part of it too is that you're not even necessarily creating anything. It's the work has sort of already been done. You're checking it sounds like, versus what you're doing now is actually working with businesses, helping them, finding things, but also you're doing the work in and of itself that needs to be done, versus there it's more of a review of things, right? Not that you obviously you're creating things out of that, but it's I guess maybe less rewarding in that sense.
No, you're absolutely right. It's like an audit by definition is I am taking what other people have produced. So let's back up a little bit for anybody who's listening to this and doesn't even understand what an audit is. So when public companies or companies issue financial statements and they're giving it to the banks for loans or to the like TSX for trading purposes, an audit is basically saying, yeah, these numbers are accurate. So we are accurate within a certain level of materiality, right? So we are just checking other people's work. I will just recreate their analysis. I will check, like when I was at the lowest level, I was literally checking data entry and be like, okay, you put in 1263, go back to the invoice. Okay, it's 1263. Okay, you entered this one properly. So it is just checking other people's work. And then as you get higher up and management is making more judgment calls, you're double checking their judgment calls. analyzing whether or not their judgment was too conservative, too aggressive, too whatever. And that's where it got more interesting.
Yeah.
But at the beginning levels, you're literally just like spot checking to see if the working papers are accurate.
Yes, yes, right, exactly. These tiny transactions or things that are, I guess, insignificant, but you have to sort of check the process and make sure that it works, and that they're
I would
doing
like
it
follow an
properly.
invoice. I would follow an invoice. Be like, so what is your process? Okay, now show me how this one invoice went through your process. And it was helpful for the clients to make sure that the employees were doing what they're supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
That's then when the employees would put up like their guards, because if they did make a mistake, they'd be pretty hostile about it sometimes.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. All right. So so you do kind of the junior accountant thing, and you did it for through, I guess, 4 years or something like that, it looks like. And what are your options after that? Obviously, you can stick around in and work in an accounting firm for longer, and I think get more responsibility and do less of probably that grunt work that you were talking about. But what are you think of the other sort of options that you're confronted with after you've sort of done your dues at the accounting firm?
So that decision was kind of made for me, because in the 2010, during that huge recession, E&Y, where I was working at the time, had 4 rounds of layoffs, and I was the 4th round.
Oh, right.
So I did look for work so typically after doing your hours and getting your designation, you would basically find a large accounting firm that had an accounting department, and you would start doing the work as opposed to reviewing the work. So you'd be preparing the reconciliations, the reports, and kind of work your way up to a controller of that business, or a CFO of that business. That's the traditional route that you would take. Or some people do go into internal audit, which is still audit, but you're doing it for your own company, again, to make sure that everyone's doing what they're supposed to be doing so the company can work effectively. I ended up going back into an audit work, with BDO for a while. And then I took a risk and I took a government job. I was a financial analyst with the Ministry of Education for a while, which ended up being a lot more audit again. I was auditing how they were spending the money that they were given for childcare funding. But I was also doing some other projects, which made it more interesting. But like you either end up going into the companies and producing the work, or other forms of audit, technically, within the companies.
Right. So how challenging would it be to sort of get out of not get out of accounting, but use your accounting? Because you need it as a base for a lot of things. Even when, I was in the finance world, and accounting is super important. If you don't have it, it's a struggle to try to do the job. But do you think it would be challenging to move out and do something else, sort of not directly accounting? Or I guess the other pull probably is that you're just going to be well paid, or more compensated, probably higher, if you're doing something closer along aligned to accounting. Is that, did you think that, or did you ever just?
I mean, my undergrad is a Bachelor of Commerce, so that in itself gave me exposure that I could basically go into any area of business. I could have gone into sales, I could have gone into HR, I could have done anything that revolves around business. Now with my CA back then, now CPA designation, you're limited to accounting or tax roles, but a lot of people go into advisory, so they're actually helping other companies analyze their numbers and figuring out what's wrong with their business or their business model. I have some friends that have gone into like mergers and acquisitions. So when people want to buy other companies, they'll take a look at stuff. So, it's not just audit. There's a lot that you can do with that knowledge. But at the end of the day, it's going back to financial statements in some aspect of it. But with my BCom, like I could have gone into finance, I could have gone into operations, I could have done a lot of different things with just a BCom, or gotten a different designation. Some people get their accounting designation and then realize it's not for me and do other stuff. Like my husband is an accounting undergrad and he went into insurance. Nothing to do with accounting, but he uses his accounting background a lot in what he does,
right,
when he's analyzing numbers. So there's a lot of different options. It's just being open to thinking outside of the box a little bit too.
Right. I think at some point you have to take a bit of a risk and go into something that's a little bit different, probably, that you may not have an experience with, but if you can certainly use what you've already know in accounting and do a little bit less audit and a little bit more maybe something different that at least you can experiment with and see if it's something for you, is sort of how I think about it. Do you think there's a certain personality that works well for being an actual accountant, or are there any sort of traits that you would need? I historically, I always thought, or I think the convention is that people think, oh, they know numbers decently well and they like math and numbers, and so you go into accounting. But do you find, is there any particular personality traits that you think would work well for someone who's going to be an accountant?
I'd say that you like to have the attention to detail, because especially in the beginning, it's not so much that you like math, because so much of what we do is on Excel spreadsheets and with calculators, so you're not really doing mental math a lot. But it's that detail to see, does everything fit? Does everything work together? But then it also depends, like I said, on what areas of accounting you end up going into. I went the entrepreneurial route. So I like looking at the big picture and helping people with the big picture, not so much the details. But I would argue most accountants that really succeed in accounting have that attention to detail, have that personality that they just want to see everything connect like a puzzle and make it work.
Right. They're sort of driven, I think, to get to the end where everything balances and works and jives, and right. I think that's kind of how
the entire foundation of accounting is that everything balances.
Right. So you have to want that. Yes, exactly. You have to want that outcome every time, and you can't you can't give up. You have to keep going, right, until you get there.
Exactly, right? And so that definitely helps. Whereas if somebody's a bit more artistic and wants to just kind of go, create without having those rules behind it, they may not appreciate accounting that much.
True that, yeah. Yeah, no, like I you mentioned before sort of coming out of high school and going to university and doing process of elimination. And I kind of did the same thing. And I thought, I just didn't know about many careers, frankly. And I kind of knew it was sort of the science route, engineering, and that very typical. My dad is an engineer, so I had that in my mind. I knew I didn't want to do that, but I didn't know what else. And it was business appealed to me. But then within business, I also didn't have any idea what I'd be good at or what I'd want to do. So it was sort of this, I kind of like numbers. I think accounting would be important to know of all the things. I think I'd be okay at it. And so I went to university thinking I would do that. And I remember I was in a co-op program. So you had to apply after your first year basically to get a job in accounting, like just a 4-month kind of co-op job. And I applied and didn't get anything. Like no one even gave me interviews. I think maybe I got one interview for accounting. And so the decision was sort of made for me there that, okay, well, you can't get a job in it, so you better look at something else. And I managed to find a finance job in my first go and realized, hey, maybe I should stick with this. But it was really kind of a similar thing where it was, process of elimination of, hey, at least if I get a designation, I can go and do a bunch of things from there potentially if I don't like it, right? It was at least a path that I liked, but I still enjoyed the accounting courses that I took, and they became super helpful in a finance career to know them. But I think I was ultimately kind of happy that I did, that I found something else and that didn't get into accounting, just for my personality. But I try to think about that a lot, the personality of an accountant and who it suits well, which is why I sort of asked you that.
You got to remember, kids are basically told, what do you want to be when you grow up, when you're 18 years old, right?
I know.
Your exposure to the world at that point is so limited. You don't even know what you want to do, and yet you're being told to pick and eliminate, in some cases, other options. You have to go into business or science or whatever it ends up being. And that, same thing. I chose a path because I knew how to get from A to B, but I had like a quarter life crisis when I got my designation. And then I was like, well, now what? I didn't like audit. I didn't really know what else I could do with it. And that's why a lot of, you and I both ended up in the entrepreneurial world. And I'm sure your accounting background really helped you when making some of those decisions in your business as well. And so I do think that
Totally.
everybody should have a basic understanding of the way our economy and everything works. But yeah, it's tough when it comes to figuring out what you want to be when you grow up. I mean, to this day, if somebody said to me, do you love accounting? I love what I've created from it, but do I love accounting? No, not really.
Yeah. Yeah. I think what you've done is actually very clever, because you can, and I remember, I didn't see it recently, but I think you mentioned somewhere and what appealed to me originally was, you said, I think you had a tagline, something about, if behind every great business, there's a great accountant, or something like that. Right. And it was sort of this interesting way for, I think, you to be an entrepreneur yourself, because by being an accountant, you actually get to experience a lot. Like, you have to do your own accounting, obviously, for your business, but then you are out there doing the marketing for it as well. You are, you have to figure out, okay, operationally, how do I, what parts do I do? What parts do I have someone else in my business do? Do I hire people? There's all the entrepreneurial angles of a business that you have to do, but then you also have the accounting, obviously, part of it as well, that you're doing, but you're getting to run a business, and you get to work with a lot of other businesses and almost vicariously live through them in getting to experience other other businesses too. Do you find that probably one of the more rewarding parts of owning your own sort of firm and working with smaller clients?
Oh, absolutely. That is probably why I am still in this field. I think if I had stuck with working a corporate job, I either would have become one of those people that just goes to work to get the paycheck, or I would have at some point quit my job and figured out another career path. It's the engaging part of being an entrepreneur that has kept me as an entrepreneur, not so much the tax, because what I'm doing is helping other entrepreneurs. I'm definitely using my knowledge to help them. And that's the part that I found rewarding. That's that education. Maybe I should have been a teacher in another world, or maybe I am now a teacher of finance to entrepreneurs.
Right.
But that is definitely the part that keeps me going. I love thinking about, well, what tip can I share now? Or what webinar can I host? Or, my next speaking engagement. I do a lot of speaking engagements with the networking groups that I'm in. That's what keeps me going, not the filing of taxes.
Right. I hear you. And so when you look at sort of the future of your firm and what you were trying to do and trying to grow, do you have aspirations? Like, is there a nice size that you sort of think, hey, this is perfect, I'm just trying, I just want to grow from here? Or do you have, sort of loftier goals to create, an even bigger firm? And I'm just curious as to how you think about the goals for your actual business.
So I'm in the process right now of getting my next designation. I want to mimic what my dad has built, because he is both an accountant and financial planner.
Right.
I'm just getting my financial planning. So I like that, but I don't think I could have the relationship with clients if I had a huge firm. Yeah. So I don't have aspirations to, compete with the Ernst & Youngs and BDOs of the world, because I like when I worked there. I don't want to recreate that.
Yes.
But, more staff to be able to do more consulting work or more part-time CFO work. I would like to get more involved, and I'm still figuring out how I can do that, because it's obviously only so many hours in a day that I can do it. And right now my client base is enough that I can do it one-on-one. So at some point I will have to delegate a little bit. Even now I have bookkeepers who do the day-to-day bookkeeping, and then I review what they do. But yeah, it's always evolving. And what I love doing about it is that interaction. So I don't know how I could scale up and still do that.
Right. Yeah.
Other than training other people to mimic what I'm doing.
Gotcha. Yeah. Is it, so what are what parts do you find sort of most stressful about, your day-to-day and your job?
My kids? No, sorry.
They would just get out of the way sometimes. Yeah.
Right. So I think just juggling all the different hats of being an entrepreneur, because in my day, there's obviously client deliverables that need to get done. And depending on the time of year, I might have multiple deliverables all due within the same time frame. Right. Then there's the sales. I'm still responsible for getting new clients and always having clients in my funnel. And the reality is every business has a level of attrition. So, sometimes clients will leave because whatever. So there's constantly that stress of I need to be bringing in new clients as well. So then there's that sales hat that I got to put on.
Right.
Then there's the social media hat and the fun stuff. Like I said, I love doing speaking engagements. They're not paid speaking engagements. So it's like, okay, balancing the stuff that I love doing versus the paying stuff. So it's just that juggle of everything. And I've got small kids. So I also want to be a mom and be around them.
Yeah.
That it's just the balancing act is my day-to-day struggle.
Gotcha. Yeah. And I guess what makes you the happiest, or when do you feel, is it getting a new client or finishing the end of tax season, or is it or there's small sort of victories that make you happy in the day-to-day of your job that you can appreciate and notice?
I think what keeps me going is when a client will leave me like a testimonial without even asking, or like I mentioned, I get a lot of my clients from referrals. So when clients refer you, that's kind of a pat on your back of this person is recommending me. They want to show people that I'm doing a good job. Or in networking groups, when other people, somebody says I'm looking for an accountant and other people say, Shalini, Shalini, Shalini. So those are like the small tokens that make me feel that, yes, I'm doing the right thing. I'm on the right path because it's being acknowledged.
Right.
Which, like I said, in the corporate world, you were never acknowledged.
Yeah. Interesting. Have you, and this is switching gears slightly, but back to something you said that I just thought about. How are you going to think about your kids and giving them career advice? Are you going to let them do it? Or are you going to tell them they have to be one of four things, or how are you going to approach it?
Well, let's not break the trend. So they get to be a doctor and I think the world is also changing. There's just so many new careers. Who knows by the time they are old enough to be making a career decision if the world of accounting even exists. So much is being automated these days.
Yeah.
I definitely think having an undergraduate is now the bare minimum. You need to strive beyond just a university education, and whatever that will look like by the time they're there will definitely dictate. I don't think an undergrad cuts it anymore. So yes, I would still push them to get a further education and to not just be the status quo. But would it be in the four main categories I was given? No. If they have a passion for something and they think that they can make a career out of it and there's a path there for them, I will support that.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's hard. I know it's hard because I think as a parent, you're trying to, and I've thought about this. I try to put myself in our parents' shoes for what they're doing, saying, you don't think about not getting a university degree. You really should get it. And it's obviously very good advice, but it also, may stifle some of that creativity. And I think us as like, I see myself as this, sort of numbers person, accounting-ish type person, and there's a conservatism and a risk aversion to it, and that's really what it is, right? It's a risk aversion that we're trying to push on to our kids, probably because they, especially when they're younger. Maybe that happens less as they get older, but there's a riskiness that they're just willing to take, and that we sort of have to instill. But it's sort of balancing that. It's not scarring them to say, hey, no, you only can do these things. Your dreams of being an actor or an artist or something like that are ridiculous and stupid, and we don't want to do that. But at the same time, we want to sort of give them this advice that says, hey, just also think about in the back of your head that like you're gonna have to pay these bills sometime, so make sure you have a plan for that.
It's the lifestyle. You got to ask them, what lifestyle do they want to lead? They want? I mean, we know what the average salaries of most different career choices are. So, if they really want to be a career that's only paying 40, 50,000 average salary, but they want to be driving around in a Corvette, well, at some point it needs to align with each other, right?
Right.
So, like I said, it doesn't have to be an accountant or, a doctor or whatever, but I always approach it, even now when I'm talking with people, like, what lifestyle do you want to lead? Because that's going to dictate all of your financial choices.
Interesting point. Because you're not taking the sort of financial planning component. Is there I imagine there's not really such when you're beginning your career, it's usually later where you then sort of think about the financial. But it would be interesting, I guess, at a very early stages of thinking about your career and what paths you're going down, university, et cetera, and thinking, hey, well, what about the financial component of that? Because you know, for X career or Y career, you can't necessarily have everything. Is that part of what your job is, and the financial planning that comes with it?
Yeah, most people don't go into financial planning as their first career choice.
Yeah.
Usually, you'll either end up like everybody that I know that has gotten their full certified financial planning designation, they've done other things and then realized how important financial planning was and wanted to share that with other people that they know.
Right.
Even if you go right into the banks, sure, you might start with selling investments or selling insurance, but at some point, it's going to want to click that, you know, people are making these decisions without really understanding behind the scenes what's going on. And that's what I want to impart to people, is understanding how your numbers make a choice. Like today on my social media this week, we're talking about your priorities when it comes to money. This is stuff nobody's taught. Nobody talks about it. Nobody talks about money at all, right? Like even within our families, my dad did talk to me about money, but because that was his career and that he learned it the hard way, so he imparted certain decisions on me so that I wouldn't learn it the hard way, but I would still ignore it and then have to learn it the hard way.
Right.
So, you know, I want money to be one of those things that we talk about every day, and so that it doesn't become that taboo topic.
You're right. It totally has. We don't really talk about it, especially just sort of this assumption that everyone has enough of it and that they're okay, and that you don't ask people about it, and you know, specifically, and that if you needed help, say, or you were short with something, you would never ask anyone. You know, it's like the last thing you'd want to do. It's sort of this thing. Why do you think that is? Is it just a lack of confidence with it, or that we all want to project that we have more money than we do, or why do you think that is?
Probably both of what you just said. So there's definitely the idea of wanting to project that we have all of our shit together,
right?
Which most of us don't.
No.
There's definitely elements of FOMO, of I'm just going to buy this and deal with how I'm going to pay for it later, because if Timmy down the street has it, then I should have it too.
Yeah.
And it's confidence, you know, depending on how your parents handled money or handled finances, it might have left some imprints of how you feel about money as well, and therefore not wanting to deal with it or wanting to deal with it can stem, like there's just so many different elements that I'm learning about, not just during this course, but just in general, now that I'm networking with different people. Everybody has a different money story, and that very much impacts how they treat and handle money. And it's education, it's talking about it, and it's just, yeah, being confident in your decisions of doing what's right for you.
Yeah, I think you just have to start to do it, and hopefully that people see that, hey, it's not this crazy thing, that you can talk about it, or you can ask for help, or you can, you know, because they are important. But I do get the sense that they're sort of bragging. Like, if you ever talk to anyone about stocks and they don't, you know, there's the odd person that might actually mention their losses, but typically you're just talking about how these great stocks that you invest in something, it's amazing. And it's the same with gambling, right? You go to the casino, you try not to tell the story too often about how poorly you did and how much money you lost. There's no one wants to. It's not a good conversation, I guess, in our current culture.
Yeah, nobody talks about their hardships, but you know, these days there's so much talk about mental health, and especially with COVID and everyone being stuck inside.
Yeah.
I think it's opening up doors that we need to talk about certain things. I mean, the amount of people that I have met or that have reached out because they've lost their job and they need to understand what the government funding is, because as much as they posted all that stuff about CERB or CRB, it wasn't really in English. So people had questions. It's such, like, money is such an important part of our world, yet nobody is really taught anything about it. Did you remember taking any finance courses in high school? I don't.
There was like accounting and like bookkeeping type stuff, but no, it wouldn't have been helpful. Like, it was only helpful if you were going to become an accountant. It wasn't helpful to the average person. And I also felt like there weren't even necessarily teachers that I think had the skills to teach it properly. Not their fault. It's just that it wasn't something that they were taught. So it's challenging to sort of teach it in a way that the average person would be able to know.
The accounting course was about, you know, how to do bookkeeping. Like, it was the debits and credits of it.
Yeah.
You know, we were never taught, how do you budget? What does financial, like, what should you track in your own finances? How do investments work? What are the different options? So we rely on other people now to make these decisions for us without really understanding what that means.
Yeah, if you don't have the foundation, it's hard to even hire someone to do it, because they could, and that's why you hear these stories of people getting taken advantage of, et cetera, because you find the wrong person that you can't necessarily trust and give them full control and faith in your money. You don't necessarily know that they're going to do all the right things with it. You hear these crazy celebrity stories of super successful people that are broke because they've gotten taken advantage of or something, which can happen if you don't understand it. You need to understand sort of what's going on and not brush it under the rug.
It's not even crazy celebrity stories. I mean, I can tell you firsthand experiences of people that have trusted their money to, large financial institutions like banks, but the person who was actually managing it didn't make right decisions. And so, now when they're looking at their portfolio to retire on it, they don't have enough because of poor decisions. And unfortunately, no one's going to come out and say, I'm a crappy person, right? It's always funny when people, I'm on Facebook a lot, and everyone's like, I want a reliable person. It's like, oh, darn, I'm an unreliable person. Right. I can't respond to you. But I think if people knew what to ask or what to look for, some of that could be avoided. I say this to my clients who are outsourcing the bookkeeping. I'm like, you can outsource the task. You cannot outsource the responsibility.
Right. Yeah. You have to be involved in some way. You can't 100% give it over to someone and then just take for, just take the numbers and say, oh, these must be right. Yes.
Exactly. Yeah. You need to question, you need to review, you need to be actively engaged.
Yeah, exactly. Have you ever done the high school thing, or university, like young students giving advice, doing talks? You mentioned you did a bunch. Have you done it for the young people?
Yeah, so I'm a volunteer with CPA Canada, and they have an entire financial literacy program. So people like high school teachers, or even not so much, I haven't seen it at university level, but high school teachers can actually request to have somebody come into their classroom and talk about basic financial literacy topics. So I've gone to some high schools and talked about budgeting, talked about filing your taxes. It's something that's becoming more available, but schools also have to know and want to reach out to get those, and it's free service. I volunteer my time. There's nobody pays for anything, so it definitely does exist.
So what do you think is important? Like what do you think is like the biggest thing that you're trying to instill or take away to these young students who may not, there's some that might be, but a lot of them may not be super interested in it. And I wonder how do you make it interesting, and what are you trying to have them take away from say a talk like that?
That is definitely a challenge. Some of them totally do tune out. Now, I mean, I'll give credit to the CPA organization. So when I do it on behalf of CPA, I have to follow their PowerPoint and their exercises. Right. I mean, I can bring my own flair to it, but the topic and the content is given to me. And they try to make it interesting by bringing like an exercise and making it hands-on. But, think of when you were 14, 15, 16 years old. Were you really going to pay attention when somebody told you that you should start investing your money now?
Right.
Like, I think a little bit of it does come within of just what is important to you at that time.
Yeah.
But as long as somebody keeps telling you, maybe one day you'll listen, hopefully.
Or just, it's just don't put it off too long. Think about it, at least consider it, know that you need to know it, even if you don't retain this information, at least know that it exists out there, and that and that you're going to be better off by thinking about it anyways than by completely ignoring it for all of your life. So I wonder if that's just sort of the best thing. But no, I've done talks more, not in that realm, but my wife's a teacher, so she's had me come to her class a few times and just talk about the career. And you'll find there's a few students super engaged, super interested. You can tell that they're asking questions, but the vast majority of them are not. And I struggle to really engage with them properly and figure out how to just get through to them a lot of the time, because it's just not always the most interesting and exciting topic, to talk about to young teens.
Well, and that's where it's finding like the forums that work for them. I've seen some people, like I'm on TikTok, watching other people, and I see a lot of people making like videos now, giving education on like the TikTok video. So it's trying to find a way to engage with them. I mean, I
Yeah.
don't do TikTok videos, but you know, it's I think the teenager years are just those challenging years where, you know, you're developing and you're being told all these things, but at the same time you're still kind of a kid, and just repetition. The more that, even if they don't listen fully when you're doing it, something is sinking in whether or not they realize it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's the foundation is there for them in the future when they come to it. I think, which is I think a lot of the ways. If you and me think back to high school, it's so long ago. It's hard to think about. I learned this very specific thing. It's more laying the foundation so that you can learn more things and build on that in the future. I think is sort of how I justify it and think about it, anyway. Um, uh, so I totally agree with that. So last question, I don't, is there any sort of advice that you would have then to people, whether they be accountants or whomever, about that you tend to always give to people before I let you go?
I guess my advice to anybody listening, whether you're a student wanting to pursue accounting or an entrepreneur, is just to find somebody that you're comfortable asking questions to.
Yeah.
Whatever that mentor looks like for you, you know, whether it's your parents, your friends, or even reaching out and doing like a paid consult. There's so many people that are wanting to impart their knowledge. Ask the questions. You don't have to go at it alone and hoping for the best.
Gotcha. Awesome. And if someone wanted to get a hold of you, what's the best way to sort of follow you or get in touch or learn more?
So there's all my social media handles. I have an Instagram, I have a Facebook under the Dharna CPA brand. And I also give complimentary consultations with people. So if you want to book a call to find out about the accounting world, or if you need the services, you can always book a complimentary consultation with me as well.
Gotcha. And the website is it the best place to go?
DharnaCPA.ca.
Dharna CPA. Okay, great. I'll also link that on my website so they can see it. And otherwise, really appreciate your time, Shalini, today. It was great chatting.
You too. Thank you so much, Greg.
Thanks. So I hope you enjoyed that episode. I know a lot of accountants. I probably know 20 accountants that I could have had in this podcast. I chose Shalini because I thought she would have an interesting angle on this one. But if you are an accountant that I know, or you're an accountant that I don't know, please message me. And if you're interested in talking, I wouldn't mind having some more on in the future. And I know that there's a lot more to it than just what I've said there, because there are a million things you can do after accounting. But I hope at least that was informative, whether you are an accountant or not, in careers and what that line of work is all about. It's kind of what you make of it, which I think is the point. So I hope you will leave me a review if you enjoyed this podcast. I've got some great ones coming up, working on some amazing things. So stay tuned and subscribe on whatever platform you're on. And until next time, don't worry, be happy.